Hello everyone, my name is Shweta Grover and today we are going to discuss uh, our new topic, risk and control metrics. So it's very important for internal audit professionals. So let's discuss this, like how we used to prepare it and what all precautions we need to take care of it while preparing this. So this is for both internal audit professionals and for the professionals who are into IFC testing. So let's start with risk and control metrics. So RCM, first of all, we need to understand what exactly is RACM, that is risk and control matrix. So risk and control matrix is a repository of what? Repository of all risks that could pose a threat to an organization operations. Now, when we are making repository of risk, we have to mention their respective controls. So the definition will complete when we add controls to it. So a repository of all risks that could pose a threat to an organization's operations, as well as the controls in place to mitigate those risks. So this is the main purpose, main motive why we prepare RCM. And what exactly is RCM? So RCM is nothing. It's a repository collection of any organization's risk and its existing controls. And there are various other information we captured in that RCM, which we will discuss in detail further. Why RCM? Why we need to prepare an RCM? So there are few pointers I have mentioned. First is increase visibility of risk to process owner. So the process owner, the person who is operating that process, he gets an idea, gets the visibility of what all risk to his processes belongs to him and how he can mitigate those risks. So it is a very good source for the process owner. Second is helps in planning the testing procedures. So this helps in this is for internal auditors or the statutory auditors. It helps in planning the testing procedures. So when they have RCM in place, they have RCM in front of them, so they can easily plan their test, like which process to be audited or tested in detail, and where we can do the sampling. Second, third one is confidence to external auditors over control environment. So when external auditors, our statutory auditors, when they used to do the audit, so they get good confidence over the control environment when they see the prepared RCM is it there, the control process is there, the company have good control mechanism in the organization, so they get good confidence over the control environment. So that is why it's very important to prepare an RCM for an organization, and updating it regularly is very important. Fourth one is, this is very important, supportive document to develop an effective BCP. So BCP is business continuity plan. So this RCM itself, becomes an effective and supportive document when organization is preparing their BCM. So BCM is business continuity management, and where we used to plan how an organization will go when there would be any unforeseen circumstances happen, what will happens to the organization or organization operations when operations gets halted, what will be the next further course of action. So this helps the organization to plan an effective BCP because it has all the risk and controls. So if organization has let's suppose they have 10 risks to their operations, so what all are controls in place against those risks, if whether that controls are effective, or the organization needs some another controls processes in place to mitigate the related risk. So accordingly, they have to plan their BCP. So where it's not possible to implement any additional controls or compensatory controls, so they have to make sure that a separate BCP is there in case any unforeseen circumstances happen. So we have an effective BCP in place. So this RCM helps in preparing that BCP. So overall, considering these all, it helps in management strategic decision making. So management it helps management in deciding which operations or which process they need to take care of more, what to whom, in which process they will spend more time, and which process is going effective. So overall, it helps management in strategic decision making. So these are the few pointers where we can dig out that yes, why RCM is important, what are the uses of RCM. So now what we will do, we'll discuss what exactly how we prepare RCM. So there are various components in RCM, and we'll discuss all of them one by one. First component in RCM is process description. So when we are preparing RCM, we need to mention the process, which, against which process we are mentioning our risk and the controls. So process is very important. So process descriptions, when I am saying, so you need to mention the process name, then it comes process description. So when you are mentioning process description for an RCM, you need to you need to so refer the good source for those process descriptions. Like suppose, let's take an example, you are auditing HR process of a particular organization. So what all documents, what all process you are process document, policy document you are going to refer when you are writing down this process description in your RACM. So, as an internal auditor, I would suggest that you should go for process walkthrough first. So, walkthrough is sitting with that process owner, discussing with them, understanding their process is very important rather than just referring a process document. It might be possible that process document is not updated one, or the process which is actually followed in the organization is not mentioned in that process document. So it's better to first go with the process walkthroughs. If systems are there, like if they are following any they have any system in place or specific software in place, do that system walkthrough also. It gives you more clarity rather than referring any particular process document. Yes, process document and SOP is very important for an organization, but as an internal auditor or an auditor, you first start with process walkthrough. Side by side you can refer the process document, because in case process owner skip any step or forgets to tell you and something about the process, so you can easily refer that process document. Plus, when you are doing this process walkthrough, so it gives you one checkpoints that whether the person, the process owner, the process owner telling you something, the process which is in place is in line with the process document. If not, then this is your observation that that has to be in line with process document. Either the process document is not updated, or the company is not as very serious while preparing the process document. They are just preparing document for documentation purpose. So that becomes in fact your one checkpoint. So it's very important when you are writing down process description, it is mentioned detailing the current process being followed in the organization. The preferred sources would be process walkthrough, your system walkthroughs, your management meeting, and then your approved process notes. So don't refer to any process document or any document being handed over by process owner. Ask for the approved ones and refer those documents only while preparing your RACM, because this is the very important column. If this won't get updated properly, the whole process will the whole purpose of this process will get vanished, because against this only we are going to write down our risk and the related control. So this process has to be very accurate and correctly described in the RAC. Risk. The second important information in the RACM, of course, is risk. Now, risk. Risk is the function of possibility, probability, and impact. So the both this topics, that is probability and impact, the both functions has to be captured in the risk column. Sometimes what happened is when we are preparing RACM, we are just mentioning the probability, we are not writing down their impact. So when we went to the process owner, so process owner is will going to generally ask you what happened if this is not in place, what will be the consideration. So it's very important when you are writing down the probability, put their impact, then only the risk is accomplished, because risk is the function of two aspects, probability and impact. So therefore it is very important to capture both the elements of risk to ascertain the appropriate risk ratings. This helps in risk ratings, which I'll discuss further. Also, risk, to discuss more on this probability and impact, I'll take one example later on this risk, like how we should write down the risk in the RAC. Control. So for before this there will be control. So so for control, you should also mention the control objective. Objective is very important. That is why a particular control exists. It defines why a particular control exists. So when you are preparing RACM, it is better to mention control objectives also. Then control. Control is activity that is carried out to mitigate the risk. It should clearly reflect how it is helping in moderating or eliminating the associated risk. This is very important. When you are writing down the control, it should be kept in mind that you should mention the controls which is mitigating the particular risk which you have mentioned earlier. That should be in line with those risks. It is not like that you are mentioning risk is one, control is two. So this should not happen. It should be in line with that particular risk. That is very important when you are mentioning risk in RAC. Activity performer. Now, this is very important. Generally, in RACM, we only mention activity owner, which is generally process owner. But when you go into the ground reality, so the performer of the activity and the owner of the activities, they both are different people. So it's very good if you can write down these two names separately. That is activity performer, like who is actually performing that control activity, and the activity owner, like who is the owner, process owner. So this helps in two ways. First, you get to know that there are two separate people for a particular activity. Second, it helps you in identifying whether proper SOD in place. SOD means segregation of duty. So your RACM by itself, give you a brief idea that SOD is there or not, proper effective SOD is there or not. So it's better to make two columns. It's my suggestion. Generally, there is only one column, that is activity owner, but I would suggest you should have activity performer also, for to understand exactly how this SOD works in a particular organization, and you can easily find out if any loopholes or any process gaps is there in SOD. Then control type. So control type would be of two types. First is key, non-key, and second is preventive and detective. So you need to mention this very specifically: key control, non-key control, preventive, detective. So when we say key and non-key, so it depends. So a particular control, a particular risk with the risk line item or control line item we are mentioning in our RACM could be key if we are preparing that. Let's take an example. If we are preparing RACM for particular department or particular process, suppose HR. So for HR, we are preparing in RACM and we are mentioning that this appointment letter, signing of appointment letter, sharing appointment letter during joining is very important. Whether that appointment letter has been shared with them, or an acknowledgement acceptance letter has been taken. So this could be key control for HR department. But when we are preparing this RACM for IFC purpose, this would not be a key control. So it depends. It depends on the purpose for which RACM is being prepared. So this has to be kept in mind when we are defining our control type. for that particular process. Like what is the purpose of those RACM? If that RACM is for IFC purpose, for financial, ICOFA purpose, then that could be key. Those key controls could be non-key controls. Non-key controls could be key controls. So we need to check the purpose of the control type, the RACM, while mentioning or typing control type. Risk ratings. Risk ratings. Now, as I said earlier, risk rating is very important and it depends on the risk which you have mentioned earlier. So, when you are mentioning risk, you are mentioning the probability and the impact. So, when you are mentioning probability and impact, it helps you defining risk rating. So, risk rating can be ascertained only after analyzing controls in place to mitigate the risk and the purpose of RACM activity. So risk rating depends on two aspects. First is you are analyzing your controls. So suppose if you have particular risk in place, yes, that risk could be big, but if you have specific and effective control in place against that risk, then risk rating would be low, medium. It could not be high because you have a control in place. So you don't need to over exhilarate or hyperate that thing that the risk is very high, but you have effective control in place, so that risk rating cannot go high. Second important aspect to consider the risk rating is the purpose of RACM, as I said earlier. So that has to be considered in mind while mentioning the risk ratings. Control method. It is now control method is what? So control method is how the control activity is being run in the organization, whether this is physically, whether this is through any system or not. Is it any software used for those particular control activity? So this has to be mentioned in the control method. So it should be ensured that method of control activity specified and not the process method. So it's very important that we are mentioning only the control method, not the process method. Let's take an example on this. Suppose you are going to process a particular transaction, suppose purchase transaction. So you have a SAP in place. One person in the SAP enters the transactions, another person approves it. So there are three levels of approval basis the transaction type, their amount and everything, and that everything goes through SAP. Now that purchase activity, suppose that purchase activity is run through by the procurement policy or the procurement manual, and when that has been run by procurement manual, so there are conditions that that manual that purchases has to be routed through procurement department, and they should be supported by proper PO. The assets has been classified in case there is addition of assets, so assets has been properly classified. So these are the control methods, and earlier which we discussed, that was the process which is routed through SAP. But to when that all purchase transactions, suppose in a day there are hundreds of purchase transaction has been happened. Now the process owner, or you can say, suppose the process owner is the finance head. So finance head is analyzing whether the expenses has been properly categorized. So he's referring the reports and he is doing his analysis on those reports, and suppose Excel or any other spreadsheet tool. So that is control, like he is analyzing those transactions. So whether that has been correctly classified, whether procurement policy has been followed or not. So that is which he is doing physically. He is not using any system. He is not doing anything. He's doing manually. He is not doing through system. So process was run through system. So when we were talking about process method, yes, that process method is systematic, it is through software. But when we say control method for that particular process, that was manual, because finance had was just using the reports and analyzing those reports. So that is manual. So it is very important when we are writing control method, we need to mention manual here, not the systematic or technical or aisa kuch bhi nahi. We need to mention that manual process is being followed. So this is very important. We are mentioning control activity method here, not the process method here. Frequency, that in that particular example where finance had, analyzing the reports, whether he is analyzing on a daily basis or weekly basis, so we need to mention the frequency. Financial statement assertions, yes. So these assertions, generally we don't capture these financial statement assertions while preparing our RACM for internal audit activity per se. When we are doing internal audit of specific department or specific process and we are preparing RACM, then we generally don't use it, because we are preparing that RACM for particular process. So there won't be any financial assertions, or if it would be there, there would be hardly any financial statement assertions. So this comes into picture when we are preparing RACM for ICO purpose or for IFC purpose. So this specific column has to be mentioned then only when we are preparing our RACM for IFC purpose. Otherwise, there is no need to expanding that sheet and mentioning all these columns, because that will be of no use. Suppose you are preparing RACM of, you are doing audit of HR process, you are preparing RACM, there won't be any use of financial statement assertions in those cases. But when you are preparing for IFC, then of course there is a need of financial statement assertions, and that has to be captured properly. So financial statement assertions come like, there are five assertions. First is existence and occurrence. So in respect of transactions, it would be whether all the transactions have been captured properly, and with respect to assets, it will be the all assets which is being recorded in books is actually in existence or not. Completeness is yes, again the transactions which has happened has actually been recorded in the books of accounts completely. Then valuation and allocation, all assets, equities, assets, liabilities, all have been recorded properly and valued properly. Your inventory has been valued properly. Rights and obligations, this is very important. So this is like, suppose inventory of third party lying with you, so that has not been captured in your books of account because that belongs to somebody else. So this is rights and obligations. It's same way as the vice versa. If any inventory is lying with with third party which belongs to you, that has to be captured in your books of accounts. The fifth one is presentation and disclosure. So the appropriate presentation has happened in financial statement, so that has to be captured in the RACM. So these are the important considerations while preparing RACM. I'll show the RACM format at the end. So these there are other columns also in the RACM, but I have taken here the important aspects and important fields which needs important considerations. Now, as I said earlier, I am going to take one example on risk and one example on controls. So my first example on risk is, so here I'll give you a brief background that exactly what this risk is. So I am doing, let's take an example. I am doing audit of performance management of any organization. So I have noticed that during their performance activity, they have this KPI setting in place, that is key performance indicator. So when they are doing this KPI setting, we have noticed that KPI goals has not been properly trickled down to lower levels. That means the KPI goal which is being set up for suppose managers or senior managers, that has to be properly trickled down to assistant managers or their executives or team leaders, whatever the chain is. Otherwise, the whole purpose of assigning the goals and accomplishment of those goals would not be achieved. So that was our risk. So first we have mentioned that risk in the RACM. The language which we have captured in the RACM is this: risk that KPI goals has not been properly trickled down to lower levels. Now, as I said earlier, risk is the function of two aspects, that is probability and impact. Here the impact is missing. So again, we have write it down like this: risk that KPI goals have not been properly trickled down to lower levels resulted in non-fulfillment of overall organization's objectives. Now we have write it down that KPI goals has not been properly trickled down to lower levels, resulted in non-fulfillment of overall organization's objective. Yes, of course, अगर हमारे goals ही properly trickle down नहीं होंगे lower levels तक, तो हमारे जो organization's objective हैं, जिसके बेस पे हमने KPI goals बनाए हैं, वो कभी accomplish हो ही नहीं पाएंगे. So that was the impact कि हम उसको fulfill नहीं कर पाएंगे. So probability and impact we have captured, but again still there is something which is missing in this in this language. Now, risk that KPI goal has not been properly trickled down to lower levels, which may lead to non-fulfillment of overall organization's objectives. एक छोटा सा language modification I have done in 2 and 3. When we are mentioning our risk, we are just giving them probability. What could go wrong? We are not giving what will wrong, what has happened wrong. It is not happened wrong. It will happen wrong. So when in the first language I have mentioned that risk that KPI goals has not been properly trickled down to lower level resulted in. This has not resulted in. This will resulted in. So that is why I have corrected that language in point number 3, and I have mentioned that instead of resulted in, I have mentioned which may lead to. That is which could impact अगर गलत होता है तो. So this has to be taken care of, that we need to mention what could go wrong. We can't give a statement that this has been happened or this has resulted. So this is very important when you are writing down any risk, because this corrected risk will lead to write down the correct control against it. So let's take the same, considering the same this example, we are going to mention the risk against the control against it. The control. So control would be training sessions conducted for line managers before initiating the goal setting process. So when you are setting up the this goal setting process, you're starting up the goal setting process, you need to give training sessions to line managers that you should be sure that all the goals are properly trickled out. Now this is a kind of I should say preventive control, like something has happened wrong, so before it happened wrong it's better to have some control in place, so that what if in any case line managers had did that thing wrong. So yes. So this is final agreed KPIs are then verified by HR managers, HRBP on a sample basis covering at least one KPI of each department function to ensure proper goal setting. So now there are two controls, which is very, it's okay. If you have 2 or 3 controls against any particular risk, mention it instead of, mentioning incomplete control. So when I mentioned first control, it feels like it is an incomplete control because it only talks about preventive controls. What about the detective control? That was not there. So suppose we that's very good. We have given training to line manager that yes, KPI has to be set up like this and all this. Still, if there is any chances of any error, so that has been detected by our second control, which is all those KPIs which has been agreed with or finalized by line manager. It is good that the HR team, the separate team, so SOD is there. So the separate team should check those KPIs on a sample basis. If the population is very huge, if the population is very low, it's good to check all the population. So this is control which we are talking about. So control is in line with that particular risk. This is not something which we are talking about something else in the control. This is particularly in line with that particular risk. So this is the example of our risk and the control. So this is all which is important in RACM. Now I'll just show the format of RACM in the Excel spreadsheet, like how we